The value of your citizenship relies on the fiscal health of the country that issued it. Countries with citizenship by investment programs are no different. Most spend every dollar of revenue the moment it arrives, but when that revenue dries up, will you become the next source of cash? Norway took a similar revenue model and turned it into $340,000 for every citizen. In this comprehensive appeal, IMI covers why sovereign wealth funds are the difference between a citizenship you can trust and one you cannot. Dominica's citizenship by investment revenues recently hit 37% of GDP. The IMF warned the government immediately and explicitly about over-reliance on the program. Strip out CBI funds, and Dominica's primary fiscal balance was in deficit. In Grenada, the National Transformation Fund directly financed 65% of capital projects at the Ministry of Social Development and Housing between 2016 and 2022. These are economies where public infrastructure, social services, and debt management depend almost entirely on a single political vulnerable income stream. And yes, CBI revenues are inherently volatile. Application volumes swing with geopolitical events, regulatory pressure, and competition from new programs. Grenada's CBI applications dropped 45% in a recent quarter after years of elevated intake driven by displaced demand. The United States has suspended immigrant visas for Caribbean CBI nations. The European Union has pressured programs toward discontinuation. A former Caribbean Prime Minister compared CBI revenue to cocaine, warning that dependency on it could destabilize the Eastern Caribbean's dollar peg if inflows stopped. When governments treat volatile revenue as a permanent line item in the budget, any interruption could create a fiscal crisis. And a fiscal crisis in a CBI country is a direct threat to the value of the passport you paid for. If you're evaluating programs or already hold citizenship in one of these countries, this is a dynamic that should concern you. Now, what could make a world of difference for these countries is a fund that Norway popularized in 1990. A sovereign wealth fund is a state-owned investment vehicle that parks surplus government revenue in diversified assets, typically international equities, bonds, and real estate. The fund generates returns over time, and governments draw on those returns, not the principal, to finance public spending. As mentioned, Norway provides the clearest template. The government deposits petroleum revenue into its fund each year, invests it exclusively abroad to avoid overheating the domestic economy, and limits annual withdrawals to approximately 3% of the fund's value. That 3% rule is a discipline. It means Norway lives off investment returns, not the underlying resource. By last year, Norway's government pension fund Global held over $1.9 trillion, owned stakes in over 7,200 companies across 68 countries, and its annual returns have averaged 6.64% since 1998. That translates to roughly $340,000 for every Norwegian citizen. Now, small CBI countries cannot replicate Norway's scale, obviously, but they can replicate its discipline. CBI revenue shares the same core characteristics as commodity revenue. It arrives in unpredictable volumes, depends on external demand, and can disappear when policy conditions shift. The financial logic for channeling it into a managed fund is identical. While you might say, I donated $100,000 or $200,000 to X Caribbean country and they allocated it to a development fund, isn't that the same thing? Not quite. Grenada has its National Transformation Fund, Dominica its Economic Diversification Fund, St. Lucia a National Economic Fund, Antigua and Barbuda runs a National Development Fund, and St. Kitts and Nevis operates the Sustainable Island State Contribution Fund. These funds collect CBI donations, but they are not sovereign wealth funds. Why? Because the development fund merely spends incoming revenue on designated projects. A sovereign wealth fund invests the principal, preserves it across economic cycles, and spends only the returns. When Grenada's fund receives your $235,000 donation, that money goes toward building a hospital, upgrading a road, or funding a school. That capital is consumed. When Norway's fund receives petroleum revenue, it buys shares in global companies. That capital compounds. Both approaches have value. Infrastructure spending is not wasteful, but a country that spends 100% of its CBI revenue on current projects has nothing left when applications slow down. A country that channels even 20% into a property-structured sovereign wealth fund builds a buffer that grows over time. If you want to understand how specific CBI programs structure their investment options and where your contribution actually goes, IMI's Program Encyclopedia covers nearly 300 residency and citizenship programs across 140 countries. You can sort, filter, and compare there. Now, Malta's National Development and Social Fund is the closest thing the investment migration market has produced to a functioning sovereign wealth fund backed by investment migration program revenue. Established in 2015, the fund had accumulated approximately €600 million by 2020, a remarkable figure for a country of fewer than 520,000 people. An independent board of governors set investment strategy. A portion went into a discretionary portfolio, while another portion funded domestic projects. Malta's CBI program was terminated following the EU Court of Justice ruling in April 2025, but the fund itself still exists. 2 lessons here. 1. Build the fund early. 2. And design withdrawal rules that politicians cannot easily override. Every argument in this video has a real-world proof of concept, and it sits on an 8-square-mile island in the Central Pacific. After independence in 1968, small island nation Nauru's phosphate deposits gave it the highest GDP per capita in the world. We bet you didn't know that. By 1975, income per person reached $50,000, putting the island ahead of every country except Saudi Arabia. With no income tax at all, the government provided free healthcare, free education, and free housing. Citizens stopped working because they didn't need to. The government then created a trust fund to prepare for the day the phosphate ran out. The Nauru Phosphate Royalties Trust accumulated over $1.3 billion at its peak, a staggering sum for a population of fewer than 10,000. On paper, Nauru had built exactly the kind of fund this video advocates. In practice, though, the fund was looted. Politicians chartered flights for overseas shopping trips, bought hotels and office towers in Sydney and Melbourne, and funded a London-based musical about Leonardo da Vinci that closed almost immediately. No meaningful efforts toward economic diversification were made until it was too late. By 2004, the trust had collapsed to roughly $300 million. The government was bankrupt and unemployment reached 90%. As a result, per capita GDP fell from $50,000 to $5,000 in a single generation, from richest to poorest. Nauru now depends on Australian foreign aid and payments for hosting a refugee detention centre. In late 2024, Nauru launched a new citizenship by investment program with donations starting at $90,000 for climate adaptation and energy security. The contributions flow into Nauru's treasury fund, not a sovereign wealth fund. When revenue slows, the projects lose their funding source. No country on earth has a more visceral understanding of what happens when windfall revenue disappears without a savings mechanism. The fact that its new CBI program channels every dollar into immediate spending is a missed opportunity of historic proportions. Stories like Nauru's are exactly why we built this channel. If you want to understand which countries are managing their programs responsibly and which ones are not, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. On March 31, 2026, St Kitts and Nevis passed the Sovereign Wealth and Resilience Fund Bill, becoming the first Caribbean nation to create a statutory sovereign wealth fund backed by citizenship by investment revenues and geothermal energy profits. The legislation establishes a managed investment vehicle with governance modelled on Singapore, Norway and Botswana. The government framed it as ending reckless spending and protecting resources for future generations. Whether the fund's independence and withdrawal constraints prove durable across future administrations will be the test. St Lucia's experiment is instructive. When a new government proposed taking direct control of its National Economic Fund in 2021, a former Prime Minister warned against turning it into a slush fund, exposing the risk that threatens any fund lacking independence from politics. If you hold St Kitts and Nevis citizenship or are evaluating the programme, this could be a positive signal. A government that channels CBI revenue into a managed fund with independent governance means it views the programme as a long-term institution, not a short-term revenue grab. So, if you were to propose to your government leaders tomorrow a sovereign wealth fund built by investment migration revenue, what would it look like? The ingredients are straightforward. A minimum of 20 to 30% of our CBI revenue should flow into the fund without requiring annual budget approval. An independent board with fixed terms should set investment strategy, insulated from election cycles. Investment should prioritise diversification, keeping assets outside the domestic economy to avoid Dutch disease effects and reduce correlation with the same political risks that could shut down the art programme itself. A spending rule like Norway's 3% cap prevents politicians from depleting the fund for short-term projects. That rule works best when embedded in legislation or even the country's constitution. The Eastern Caribbean CBI Regulatory Authority, established through a 2025 agreement among 5 Caribbean CBI nations, provides a potential framework for regional coordination. A pooled or coordinated fund across those 5 jurisdictions could achieve even better diversification, lower management costs, and stronger governance than 5 separate microfunds operating independently. The 14 countries that have proposed new citizenships by investment programs in recent years should design sovereign wealth fund provisions into their program architecture from day one. Retrofitting fiscal disciplines after revenues start flowing is considerably harder than building it into the original legislation. Your passport is only as strong as the government backing it. You've learned that in today's video. But now that you understand the government side, the next step is building your personal strategy around it. We made a video covering 28 rules for sovereign individuals that goes well beyond which passport to get. Check that out on your screen now. Thanks for watching.